Hey friends, this is Graham from the recordingrevolution.com, and today I want to welcome you to Ask Joe number 213. Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the podcast for this week. My name's Joe Gilder from HomeStudioCorner.com, but you probably knew that already. Those of you here live on the chat, welcome. We do this every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Central Time. We took a little bit of a break this year, but we're back, and we're having lots of fun, even making fun of our good friends like Graham. Wasn't really making fun of. I think imitation is the greatest, most sincere form of flattery. So, yeah. And who are we kidding? We all know Graham is not watching this nor listening, so the chances of him even finding out are pretty slim. So we'll just keep that between you and me. Deal? Let's not go and run to Graham and tattle on Joe. I tell my kids tattling is bad, so let's not do the tattling thing. This is another episode, the second or third episode from the new studio, which is starting to feel like a studio, especially after doing the 2-day session with Homestead Collective. Caitlin and Ben are both actually here on the live stream. So if y'all have questions, now that you've been the inaugural maiden voyage, the first session I've done in this studio, and I think it went rather well. So if y'all have any feedback or any questions to share with the folks in the chat, that'd be kind of dope. But yeah, we're rolling into, it's December now. I've got end of the year and beginning of the year plans, lots of stuff going on. I am slightly overwhelmed, but doing Ask Joe calms my nerves. So thank you for being my nerve calming balm. Yeah, it's been nice. So real quickly, really quickly, I want to talk about just a couple of lessons learned from that session from last week. So we talked about prep for the session in the last episode, talk about a few things that I learned. If you happen to catch any of the live streams that we did, we streamed at least twice, one of them for at least a good hour here on the channel. And you got to see a little bit of how we were working. It went really well. One of the things that I learned in the last episode, I mentioned how important it is to write out a chart before the session begins. Yeah, I don't think that's necessarily super true because I never got around to doing that. I was doing 1,000 other things and getting prepared for the session. And thankfully, Caitlin and Ben showed up knowing what was going down, and they laid down everything perfectly. So there were no mishaps from not knowing where we were in the song and things like that. Preparation is so key. If you work with musicians who are A, talented, and B, prepared, that's like the ultimate, I can't even talk. It's so good, right? That's the ultimate thing you want. Sometimes you, it could go any number of ways, but I'm really happy with the way the session went. We did mostly acoustic stuff. I'll show you, if you look over to my left, you can see this is kind of a sort of a storage closet. I took the doors off, put a bunch of treatment in there, and then during the session, we set up 2 gobos to either side of it to kind of create kind of a 3-walled sort of layout for most of the recording. So all the guitars, banjo, mandolin, and vocals all happened in that little nook that we created. And it was cool to all be in the same room. I think the biggest thing I learned, or biggest takeaway, was I really enjoy being in the room with the musicians. If you remember at my last space, you could actually go into the other room to do the recording, and it was nice in the sense that I could have the speakers on. Not everybody has to have on headphones, which has its own level of complexity, keeping up with who's got what headphones on and all that stuff. But being in the same room with the musicians was really quite delightful, I will say. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. You could make eye contact while they're playing. Obviously lots of joking around and having fun too. You can totally do that over a talk back, but it was nice to kind of get back into, we're all just hanging out in the same room and making music, and it was lovely. Anything else from the session? Did a lot of, so for percussion on the session, we did mostly just shaker, tambourine, and then a tom drum that they brought. And it was fun to get the sounds that we want. I did a lot of EQ on the way in, using the built-in EQ on the board, and went ahead and printed that EQ'd sound into the recording, which I think made it turn out really well. And I went ahead and got a lot of the tones that I wanted, which is, just chalk that one up to another sort of get it right at the source moment, which I think we were able to do really, really well. Another get it right at the source anecdote, Ben was playing his Taylor guitar, which sounded fantastic. There was a guitar solo that needed a different tone. So we grabbed my Gibson, played that. It worked perfectly for that part. And that's how we're going to end this section, with a big old boom. Yep, I'm getting back in the saddle, folks. I think I finally nailed the boom. I'm feeling really good about that boom. That was excellent boomness, I think. So, anyway, welcome back to the podcast. I am here to answer your questions. I just do the silly stuff at the beginning for my sake, and then I can focus on you and your questions. So, those of you here in the live chat, you are where I'm focusing for the questions, so keep them coming, and I will do as many questions as I can in the next 30 minutes. I don't know. We'll see how far we can go, given that I just drank a bunch of coffee and I already kind of have to use the restroom. So my answers will be fast. I'll be talking more quickly today. Chris says, Joe, do you ever use horns in your songs? I don't, for the simple fact that I don't know a lot of horn players and I don't play them myself. Certainly not against it. I don't have the skill set to write a good horn part, and there are times when horns can be really cheesy, so I wouldn't want to go that route, right? But I think one day I'll land on some sort of cool funk thing for an album where it's like almost like a Tower of Power thing, like where it's horn sections, a bunch of stabs, and big like awesome drum part. Anyway, maybe one day. I think I would love to sing to something like that for show. Y64 Studio says, what screen capture software do you use? I use ScreenFlow for all my tutorial videos, and then for this live stream, I'm using something called Wirecast Play, which is, I think, free or $10. That streams directly to YouTube Live, and then for all my Gilder Cam videos, I edit with iMovie. That's right. I am a iMovie user. Who knew? Scott says, have you ever had to mix a song that you just hate? Do you think your opinion of the song affects how you mix it? I have. Thankfully, not a lot, because, I don't know, probably just because I've been blessed to not have to mix some really bad songs. But it happens, right? And what I try to do is it's kind of the same sort of idea as if I do mixed critiques for somebody. So I do a lot of mixed critiques. And the overwhelming majority of them are good, right? They're good. It's good song. It's pretty good mixes, and I just give them advice. But occasionally I'll have one that's just, it becomes difficult to come up with anything positive to say about it, because everything's just not great. In those situations, and when I'm having to mix something I don't love, I try to focus on find something that I like and then build my mix or my critique around that. So if most of the things in this song aren't great, but it actually has there's this one guitar part that I like, I'll probably have that be really loud in the mix, make it sound amazing, and then build the rest of the mix around that. You really just have to find something that you feel good about. On the flip side, if you get somebody who submits stuff to you and it just doesn't sound very good, if I'm being honest, and I probably shouldn't say this publicly, I get a little excited when I get tracks that just don't sound very good, because then I know that I'll never have to, and no, Ben Holmes, I'm not talking about you, because I know that if I get tracks that already sound bad, I know in my heart of hearts that I'm not going to make this sound amazing, and then I don't have to, like, it's not on me to fix what they've broken. So I'll just do the best with what I have, but I'm not a miracle worker, Jim. So I end up usually just having fun and just mixing it and getting it there. And there's a thing that happens if someone's submitting tracks to you to mix and like to hire you to mix, and they're paying you to mix it, then what they're submitting to you most likely is some of their best work. And they may just be in a stage in their musical journey where they can't hear that it doesn't sound good. And that can work out to your benefit, because if they can't hear how bad it sounds, then they probably won't have huge expectations of what you're able to do. You will most likely still be able to make their stuff sound as good as possible, and they'll probably still be happy. A lot of this comes with a humongous asterisk that you need to have the expectation and conversation beforehand that, hey, these are the things I'm hearing in the tracks. These are problems that that aren't possible to be fixed in mixing. I will do my best to make this sound amazing, but just so you know, this is still going to sound like you and your recording when I'm done. There's no way around that. Tyler Campbell, first time on the stream. What's up, Tyler? He says, thanks for what you do, Joe. I found the podcast helpful for a long time. You are very welcome. And here's Tyler's question. Struggling to get a full sound on singer-songwriter stuff. Your EQ compression and other content is really helpful, but I still land far too thin and empty in comparison to the pros. Any advice? Ooh, this is a good one. Really good question. So I have done... This is one of those things where I'm going to contradict myself. If you make YouTube videos for years and years and years, you're going to end up changing your mind on stuff, and you're going to start contradicting yourself. And this is one of those times. Early on, for a few years, so early on, when I would record vocals and acoustic guitar, I would slap the microphone right up as close as I could. The idea being I'm in an apartment, and there's a kid running around upstairs, and I've got to just get as much sound as I can get to drown out all the other sounds, like the cars going by and things that happen in like an apartment building, right? And so that the theory is good. I mean, it makes sense at least. But the practicality, the actual recordings themselves ended up being really boomy. So I would spend inordinate amounts of time in mixing trying to use EQs to make my boomy acoustic guitar sound like the guitars I was hearing in all my favorite albums. And I could only get it part of the way there because the recordings themselves weren't great. Same thing with vocals. And so I started on this crusade of backing the mic away and getting a more natural sound. The problem with that is there's a happy space in the middle where it's nice and warm and it's not too bright. I was backing the mic away like a foot and a half. Suddenly there was no more boominess, and I was getting a lot of detail and all that, all those catchphrases, but there really wasn't any warmth. And I was assuming, well, I can add that back in with EQ, and it's not the same. So I found on both vocals and acoustic guitar especially, as I moved the mic away to, a foot and a half, or, I saw pictures of Sinatra doing vocals and he's standing 8 feet away from the microphone. And I thought, well, then maybe that's how you're supposed to do it. Maybe I've been fighting boomy vocals and I just moved the mic away and I'll solve the problem. Well, I overcorrected. I moved it too far away to where there was no warmth. And there's no way to get that warmth back with some sort of fancy mixing trick or multiband compression or insert whatever trick you want to try. It just wouldn't really work. So I've come full circle to where now I'll get the mic pretty close to the guitar, just shy of boomy. So if it's got a little extra bottom end, I'm happy. If it's super boomy, I'll move the mic. But even last week with the session with Ben and Caitlin, you can ask them. I put the mics pretty close, and they ended up sounding pretty big. But I didn't go so close to where they were boomy or they couldn't be fixed with just a small amount of EQ. Same thing with vocals. The vocal mic that we used the whole session was that Mini K47 from Roswell Audio. Great sounding microphone. I've used it on my voice a lot, used it on Frankie Branco's voice a lot, used it on Caitlin's voice a lot. And I found that if I did the normal like 8 to 12 inches away on my voice, it just, no matter what I did, it would sound harsh. And by moving it much closer, getting it, 3 to 4 inches away from my mouth, it suddenly opened up and had this big, beautiful sound that wasn't boomy at all. So my biggest suggestion to you, Tyler, is to move the mics closer and capture a warmer sound at the source. Then you can go through all the different mixing and EQ and compression techniques to maintain it. I will say in acoustic stuff like that, like a guitar vocal, I don't do a lot of compression. I may just do compression on the mix bus, but I don't do much other than that. And EQ, subtle EQ here and there. But if you do it right, you shouldn't need tons of EQ. Andrew says, any advice on releasing and promoting music that the mainstream general public might consider weird and not see the appeal in? Well, the thing is, Andrew, very few of us are going to release something that millions of people are going to listen to, right? For the sake of there are just tons of musicians out there releasing music, and if you're making stuff that you're already saying is a little weird, then what you need to do is, I don't know if you're doing this, but if you're thinking, I'm going to convince the masses to like my weird thing, I suppose that's possible, but what you'll have much more fun doing is find that audience that likes your weird stuff and promote your music to them. There's a great book by Seth Godin called The Icarus Deception. If you do anything creative, I think you should stop what you're doing and read that book and read it again and again and again. But a part of what he talks about is instead of trying to appeal to the masses, find your tribe, find the group that you're a part of that wants what you're doing, and then serve that group really well. And it takes a lot of work to find that group, but once you do, you can serve. So I've got a group of people here on YouTube who'll show up at 1 p.m. on a Tuesday to listen to me do a stupid intro and then answer questions, right? Is it 1 million people? No. As of this moment, it's 123. For some people, they think that's a huge number. For a lot of people, they're like, that's tiny. I just think this is fun, right? It's gone up over the years of doing these live streams, but I am super thankful that you 123 people are giving me your time to hang out here. And so that's a part. Cat, hang on, the cat's at the door. Most professional podcast in the history of podcasting. But anyway, I'm thankful. Like, you sat there while I went to let my cat in. That means a lot to me. So yeah, I think find the crowd. So I found a crowd of weirdos that want to hang out with me in the middle of the day on a Tuesday, and that works well. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's how I would answer it. And here's something interesting. So I don't know. It's hard for me to keep up with everything that's going on in the chat while I'm doing this thing. But I'm seeing, to the last question about making things warm and full, I'm seeing people answer the question by saying, oh, never mind. I was going to accuse you all of giving a bad answer, but I see the real question now. Okay, Craig Higgins asks, Joe, I have a stereo drum track recorded via the Glenn Johns method with 3 mics. The cymbals are too loud in left and right channels. Any method to reduce those cymbals with EQ or multiband? Yeah, I mean, you can try multiband and EQ. Probably the thing I have the most luck in a situation like that is using a low-pass filter and just rolling off the high frequencies to a point, or you can go, if there's a certain frequency where those cymbals are really ringing, you can pull those down. But, I mean, honestly, it's one of those things you should have captured in the recording phase. If the cymbals were too loud, that's why I always recommend, especially if you're in the room with the drums, you can't really hear in your headphones what the recording sounds like. Record something, stop, and then go listen back to the recording and then determine, are the cymbals too loud? I know that's not what you're asking, but that's the real answer, is to not let that happen. But yeah, you can use, honestly, when there's too much cymbals, in like a room mic, for example, I usually just roll off the high end entirely and just forget using the cymbals from that track, if that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, those are things to try, but honestly, if the source wasn't right, then there's not a lot you can do. But maybe I've not found multiband to be helpful with higher frequency stuff. If there's like upper mid range, like 2 to 4K on a vocal, it's really great for that. Anything in the mids or the lows, it's great for that. High frequencies, it's a little weird. You can certainly try it, but I don't have a lot of hope that it would do super well. Somebody said Weird Al has a following. Yes, he does. Let's see. Caitlin's excited that Wayne is in the video. Caitlin loves cats. Where was that question just a second ago? Somebody said, what was that book again that I mentioned? It's called The Icarus Deception. Icarus, like the Greek mythology story of Icarus with the wings, and he flew too close to the sun and he crashed. Let me see if I can find I'll find the cover so you can take a look at it. But it's by a guy named Seth Godin. Whoop. Here it is. Let me make the screen bigger. Hang on. We are just really crushing it today. Here is the book, The Icarus Deception by Seth Godin. I prefer the audiobook version, but of course you can get the physical version as well. Seth is really good at what he does. So if you've not followed any of his stuff, he's just really fun to watch. He stays pretty theoretical, doesn't get super practical, which can be frustrating sometimes, but just really good stuff. Johnny Fuller is here. He says, new to Studio One, moment of silence for Sonar. Yeah, by the way, I don't know if you've heard this, but Sonar is like no more. So a lot of folks jumping on the Studio One bandwagon, which I think is fun. Anyway, Johnny says, I was wondering if you can control faders with key commands. I don't think you can, Johnny. You can control the level of the audio with key commands. So I've got plus and minus on my keyboard set to trim a piece of audio up or down, like the gain control, the whatever you want to call clip gain. So I do it that way. But I don't think you can do it the way you're asking. What's a good thing to keep in mind while using compression? Good thing to keep in mind is listen to it. and make sure you're making it better. A lot of people want to compress. First of all, have a reason for compressing. Most of the time, I'm usually grabbing a compressor because I hear something that I want to change. So if you're just compressing because you think you should, maybe you shouldn't, possibly. Breed is saying sonar is no more. Yeah, Gibson bought Cakewalk, and they're not developing sonar anymore. I think they will still maintain a little bit of support for previous versions, but they're not going to be making updates and supporting any further versions from what I understand. Okay, maybe it's not dead, it's just not growing. But anyway, a lot of folks jumping ship. Any word on the Studio Live 32 update for DAW control? No. I thought it was going to be November. Those things, I'm assuming, take time. Sam Kanak is here. Life is good. What's up, Sammy boy? Sammy, you're going to NAMM, right? I need to get my ticket and book a flight because we need to hang out again. And we should make music this time, if we can. In regards to loud cymbals, you could do, as Joe says, and EQ out the high end and then add in cymbal samples. Then you can control the cymbals more precisely. That's a cool idea, Spazzy. Maybe hard to pull off, would take a lot of work. And then the question would be, is it worth it? Jan Lutzer says, when is the Homestead Collective EP coming out? Is there a newsletter I can subscribe to for updates? Yes, it's coming out soon. I'll be done this week with edits, mixes, masters, and all that. But then go to homesteadcollective.net, I believe is their website, and look them up on Instagram. There should be ways for you to subscribe. You'll hear about it from me when it's out, so if you forget to subscribe to them, I will be sure to spam you about them. I'm kidding. It's not spam because you love me. You love me. Trust me. You love me. Do you find the small Aratone type speakers useful? Well, funny you should mention. You may have seen me lean over a minute ago, like I was pushing a button. I was, because as you may recall, I've got these crap speakers from Roland that I've had for like 10 years, and they sound just awful, but they work well as a small crap speaker. Problem now is they, anytime my cell phone gets a text, they buzz, so I usually leave them off until I need them on, which is a little annoying, but when I was doing the podcast, they started doing that sound, so I had to turn it off. So yeah, I think they're helpful. I don't use them a ton, but they serve a purpose. Specifically, they can show me if general levels are wonky, like if kick drum's too loud or too quiet. I can sometimes notice it a little better on the smaller speakers, and then anything in the mid-range. That's if it's too harsh in the mid-range and I can't quite hear it on my big speakers, those like call attention to it right away, which is super helpful. Anuraj says, are you for or against strict LCR panning? I'm against anything strict for the sake of being strict, but I do think LCR is a great starting point. So every mix I do, and when in a recording session, like last week with Ben and Caitlin, if something was going to go to the left, I pan it all the way to the left. Only exception being like drum overheads, I'll bring them in a little bit usually, and vocal harmonies a lot of times, unless it makes sense, I'll usually keep them a little tighter. But for most other things, I'm panning it hard left, hard right, or up the middle, and then if it needs to be moved around, I'll move it. Once you start following a rule for the sake of the rule, you've kind of missed the point. It's just a great, if you're sitting there debating, should it be panned 70% left or 100% left? That's a waste of time. But if you're thinking, should it be left or right or middle? To me, it's helpful in thinking about balance, especially during recording. So last week when we were recording with Ben and Caitlin, it was mostly acoustic guitar as kind of the primary instrument, and then we're adding in maybe a banjo or another acoustic track or mandolin or piano and different percussion stuff. But mostly for the chordal instruments, we were thinking in terms of, okay, we've got the main guitar that's going to be up the middle, and you just recorded a second guitar, which is going to be left. What's going to balance it on the right? And then we would make that decision, and then we would record it. So essentially, we're making panning decisions in the recording phase so that everything is balanced. So if we have two parts, one's up the middle, one's left, and there's no other part to balance that on the right, it's not going to sound like a good production, right? So in a sense, we're using LCR even in the recording phase to help us pick out what parts need to be where. Sam Kanak says, the new room looks peaches, man. I don't know what that means, but I'm going to guess it's a good thing. Coming from a guy who grew up on a peach farm, I'm going to guess that's a good thing. Graze or Grazi says, better to use Bluetooth speakers nowadays? Not really. It's annoying to have to sync, especially for what I'm doing. I'm switching on my central station, so a Bluetooth speaker doesn't make much sense for me for that, switching between listening to my main speakers and listening to those. But I think Bluetooth speakers are cool for listening. But during mixing, I'd rather have them hardwired. Have you ever had a moment where you can't hear a problem in your mix in your room, and so it is hard to know when tracking if you're getting it right? I had a nightmare with a bad bass track. That question is from Peter. Peter, absolutely. Your room. See, people talk about get your room to be as accurate as possible in the context of mixing, but it's just as important in recording, right? Especially if you're doing what I say and you record it and then you listen back on your monitors to make sure the quality's there and keep moving forward. If your room's lying to you during mixing, it's also going to lie to you during recording. That's where I think every home studio is a broad statement, but I really believe every home studio should have a good set of headphones. There are lots of good headphones out there. I just bought a new pair for that session last week of, what were they? The ATH M40s. They were like $80 on sale. They sound great. The Sennheiser HD280 Pros I've had for 10 years, they sound great. These are more expensive, but the Sennheiser HD650s, these are fabulous. Like, mastering engineers recommend these. So they're great. Not for recording, but they're good for mixing and mastering and for referencing. So these are what I listened to a bunch, like during the session last week. So while Ben is laying down his guitar, I'm listening on here, and these are going to give me a good idea of what the track sounds like. Faux show. Matthew Kelly says, how would you compare the SM7B with a large diaphragm condenser mic for capturing singer-songwriter vocals? The SM7 sounds great. It needs more gain, so I would pair it with like a cloud lifter or, hang on. Or one of these. This is, what is it called? The SS1 from the Simply Sound Company. You can see that right there. It's essentially a cloud lifter. It's cheaper, and it has lasted longer for me. They sent me this for free, and it works great. So I use that with the SM7. My SM7 is dead. Not dead. It has a buzz, so I need to get it fixed. But I love it. It's a great it works great on lots of things. It's low output, so you need a little boost out of something like that to get it to a decent enough level for your preamp. But it's great, especially if you're going to be, you talk about guitar, vocal, singer-songwriter. If they're going to be playing and singing, then I'm all about a dynamic on the vocal. It'll help to not pick up too much guitar in the vocal track. I love the SM7. There's a reason you see it all over the place. As far as comparing it to a large diaphragm condenser, they're just very different. The SM7 is a little darker, although it can still sound pretty bright. It's got a little more of an aggressive sound, and it's not going to be nearly as crystal clear. So if you want a nice, clean, clear, crisp, airy, breathy vocal, you probably have a hard time getting that with an SM7B. That said, when I started using one for the first time, I was surprised how bright you could make it sound. It just kind of depends on what you want, and you probably just have to audition the two and compare them. I will say, years ago, I did a comparison between the SM7 and the SM57, and the difference was not super great. So if you have a 57 lying around, I know it doesn't look like a proper lead vocal mic, but go ahead and use it, and you'll get an idea of what it can sound like. They're great mics, as cliche as that sounds. Has anyone tried to use a guitar booster pedal on a dynamic mic to work as a microphone preamp, just like a cloud lifter? I'm sure someone has tried it. The problem with guitar pedals is there's a whole difference in impedance thing going on that I'm not smart enough to understand. Ben Holmes says, when you're recording your own music, do you plan everything in advance, like a client session, or just muddle through, scratch tracks, then all guitars, then bass, or just however it develops? Well, it depends on the session. So if I need drums and bass, then I got to book the session, right? Because I got to get other people involved. If it's more like an acoustic project, like my second EP from this year, that one I just kind of set aside a group of days mostly to record and just focus on it. By the way, I still owe you all a fourth EP, which is likely going to be piano-based and more stripped down. That one I'm just going to give myself 3, 4, 5 days to write and record and release and mix and all that. So those are a little more loose of a structure, but still I've got to get it done so I can move on to the next project and the next one and all that. Tiki, what's up, brother? Says, how do you mix a song that you're afraid to tackle because of reasons? I don't understand the question. Ask it again. Jacob Wing says, do you learn anything new on your Presona Series 3 during the Homestead Collective sessions that helped your workflow, or you just liked? Anything you didn't like or you need to adjust? What a great question, Jacob, because I did. So between takes, I would nerd out with Ben, who's an audio guy too, the guitar player, the instrumentalist. He plays everything, about different things I was learning. I learned that there is a function for how the mutes work. So one thing we were doing is for percussion, we would use a ribbon mic, but then occasionally we would switch to a condenser for the tom track because it sounded better, and I wanted to run it through the same channel. So when I would unplug, it would make a loud noise in people's headphones. Well, it wasn't doing it out here because I had the track muted, but that mute didn't also apply to their headphone sends. But I found somewhere in the settings there are different settings for how the mutes work. So it can still be a pre-fader send to the auxes, to the headphone mixes, but the mutes will still apply across all of them. So whether I'm looking at my main mix or a sub-mix of a headphone mix, when I hit that mute button, it mutes it for everybody. That was super interesting. Yeah, that was the one thing that I thought was super interesting and helpful that I didn't know. I wouldn't have known that without doing a session because I don't really worry about headphone mixes when it's just me. So that was fun. Also figured out a way to get all the microphones to route just to headphones and not to come out the speakers, so I didn't have to worry about muting things before turning the speakers on, which was super helpful too. All right, Tiki says, when you're intimidated by a song that you have to mix, how do you start to work in a confident manner? I would pick something that you really like and something you feel, if anything in that mix you feel like you could do really well, and do that first. Final question, Christmas lights, white or colored? The correct answer, the only answer, is white.